Afternoon, Tim. How you doing?
Afternoon, Shabbar. I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm actually feeling very hot for the first time in ages in my my little cubby hole of an office. It's quite nice that the sun is shining.
Beautiful day today. Yeah, very
Yeah,
nice.
really nice. So we're going to carry on from something that cropped up in last week's episode, which was my affair with the Amex travel voucher,
Mhm.
where I was toying with trying to maximize value from this voucher. And so go back and listen to last week's episode if you haven't, because it will provide a little bit of context. But for those that are just tuning in, I had this Amex voucher for £200, and it caused me probably more anxiety than it did pleasure because I just couldn't find the hotel for one night to take my wife away where I could get maximum value from that voucher. And I must have mentioned this word value so many times that you sort of noted that you're talking a lot about value, and that might be a good place for us to have
Mm.
another discussion. So that's the context for this week. I think it's be good to first of all just unpack a little bit what is value for money as a starting point, because it's something that I probably splurt out, several times a week. Value for money, value for money. What's your experience around people that you've worked with, and this question of what actually value for money?
Great question. Before I go into my experience of other people, maybe we look at this word. And you're right. When I was listening to you talking about booking your getaway with your wife and this lovely £200 voucher, you used this phrase getting value. And it felt quite the way you were using it didn't feel life giving. It didn't feel like getting value was going to really make you have a lovely weekend. It felt a little bit tighter and a bit more kind of constraining the search for value. Not necessarily like that for everyone, but it did make me interested in this phrase value for money. And we hear it everywhere. We need value for money. And certainly in business environments and professional environments, we're always talking about value for money, getting value for money. And as I say it now, it often does feel a bit tight. It doesn't feel very creative or life-giving. Where to start? I looked up the word value. I like looking at the origin of words, the etymology of words. And from around 1300s, I'm reading now from an etymology dictionary. Around 1300, it's from Old French. It's about the price equal to the intrinsic worth of a thing. So the price equal to the worth. That's what we mean when we say value
Yeah,
for money, but I think it's really problematic. I think that's
yeah,
really problematic because what you're immediately doing is equating a number, the
yeah,
price, the money number, with what something is actually worth. And you're saying
yeah,
that's the value. We can somehow equate the worth, the goodness, the value, the importance of something with a price. I think it's that way of thinking, which is automatic to most of us with value for money, that becomes the problem. Now, if you go just a little bit further, so allow me to be a dictionary geek. The old French word value is the worth, the price, but also the moral worth, the standing, the reputation. So if you go a bit deeper, this word value is pointing to a whole load of qualities that you can't easily put a number on.
mm,
Morals, standing, etc. And if you go even further, it comes from the Latin valere, meaning to be strong and to be well.
okay,
So value, you could say really or originally is about what is strong and healthy and well and moral. But it's come to mean somehow measuring the worth according to a price. And I think along the way, our whole society, you tell me if you think this is correct, but our whole society being hypnotized by this money story and hypnotized by the power of numbers, I think we've come to think that value is tied up with a number and am I getting what I should for the number, and forgetting what is really strong, moral, worthy, and healthy, which often is not linked to the number.
Yeah, so as soon as you said it, I was like, crikey, I can see how this is just causing grief unnecessarily, because you're just tying something which is essentially intangible, right? In terms of the quality of an experience, the feeling, and you're trying to measure that up against a number, and in some weird way you're trying to apply some sort of formula to work out whether you've received value for money. And that's very subjective on an individual basis, but even person to person, and we all value different things. I think that's easy for me to recognize that even in my relationship with my wife, we value different leisure activities. Okay. And therefore, you know, even when money comes into it, it suddenly becomes a case of, well, I don't value this because of the enjoyment that paying this amount of money gives me.
Or we may just value different things. Sorry,
Yeah,
go on.
yeah. And then I'm suddenly thinking, okay, but that's discounting the feeling that my wife might get from that same transaction. So when I'm spending, oh my god, my head is just spinning anyway. I'm gonna go back to you.
All right. Well, it's already making me think there may be several episodes, but maybe your head spinning and me seeing all of these angles, maybe there's something really important for people listening to notice that what's a very everyday phrase, good value, value for money, has got a lot more to it. And that's very often the case with all of these money conversations we're having. Numbers, phrases around the number, in this case, value for money, we treat as if they're very superficial and we all know what they mean. And as soon as you scratch the surface, there's a lot going on. So some of the things you've said and I've said, value, true value may be pointing to something that's much more intangible, hard to measure, subtle, like strength, health, moral worth, standing, much more earthy, embodied qualities, really. That's the first thing. Secondly, is as soon as you realize it's pointing to qualities rather than just a simple transaction, well, maybe my values are very different from someone else. And therefore, maybe what I feel I want to spend my money on is very different from my wife's. And I have an exercise I do. Maybe we could do it sometime, or maybe we could record it for listeners on money values, where you quite consciously write down all the different areas of life that you might spend money on, and you prioritize the ones that for you are really important. So one person might say, I love experiences with my family, so I will spend money on that. And that's more important than having nice furniture. So that's a money value. Someone else, it might be the opposite. So they feel I'm going to spend lots of money on furniture, but I don't care
Mm.
about time with my family or whatever. So there's a lot to this. Now, if I take one more step, there's also this lovely Oscar Wilde phrase, which many people will know, where he wrote, "What is a cynic? A cynic is a man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing."
Yeah, I've had.
Now, we can get into cynicism because there's a whole ancient philosophical school of cynicism, which is actually a very interesting area of philosophy. But leaving that aside, what Oscar Wilde is doing is he's separating. He's saying, actually, a cynical, weary, depleted, joyless, lifeless way of looking at the world, I think that's all bound up in cynic in this case, is someone who focuses on the price of everything but misses the value. So, having said the real definition of value is not always about things we can tie up with the price, when we're just focusing on the number, the price, but we miss the true value, that's not taking us in the right direction of life.
There is, for me, and I'm just going to speak for me because that's always easier. There is this feeling that the number is just so important, and tying up with that number this idea that money is scarce. Now, I may be going off on a tangent here, and this might not be part of this conversation because I know we did talk about scarcity, but is that linked with this idea of value becomes a problem in terms of am I getting value because I'm viewing money as scarce and not abundant?
I don't know. It might be, and it might be more for some people more than others. So if I were to guess, I think for today we can focus on value,
Hmm.
and then we have a following conversation about scarcity and abundance. And I'm going to suggest for some people, they may be very intertwined, but I don't think they have to be.
Right.
I think we could explore a life of really valuing our life and really paying attention to things that are valuable, whether we have lots of money or not. And my son this morning was doing his first English GCSE, his first GCSE, and one of his essays is on Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol
Okay.
and writing about Scrooge. And Scrooge has plenty of money, but it doesn't stop him being incredibly pernickety and miserly about what you might call the value for money. And I was listening in the car yesterday to all sorts of quotes from Dickens about the sort of character who misses life, misses love, misses community, misses what's truly valuable in the story. It's the Christmas spirit and everything involved in that because he's so busy looking at money and price and has plenty of money. He doesn't feel abundant with his money,
Mm.
but from a numerical point of view, he's not scarce with money. So I think for today, if it works for you, let's hold that question. Let's talk about value because there's a lot to
Okay.
explore about what's really valuable in life and how can we use our money to support value in ourselves and others. And then maybe next week we'll look at scarcity and
Okay.
abundance.
Yeah. Okay. So what's the next sort of step on this particular journey of uncovering, like, what am I actually trying to get
Hmm.
from this? And even just when I say it, what am I trying to get, or what am I trying to achieve when I say, well, this was value for money?
It's a great question. So in the money work, as you know, we often invite people to notice these little funny moments. I'm getting a bit obsessive here, I'm getting uptight here, I don't want to look here. And the first question is through the lens of what we call detective work. What's going on? What am I trying to do? And to ask those questions, I always say kindly, curiously, and honestly. So if we stay for a minute, I have various thoughts and models about value, and maybe we get onto those. But if you just check in with yourself, yeah, you've got this £200 voucher. Great. You've just been given free money. You're going to have a lovely 24-hour break with your wife. Great. But you're caught up in the pursuing of what you're calling value for money. What do you think is going on? Maybe it is scarcity for you, but what are you trying to do? What are you trying to get?
I think we sort of touched upon this sort of last week, and we mentioned this idea of not wanting to, like, appear like a fool,
Mm-hmm.
wanting to be shrewd.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to I want to feel a certain way
Mm.
by eking out every sort of last pound from this free money. Yeah, I think that might be quite a large part of it. It almost feels like an obligation to maximize. And so this is the interesting thing. So I'm just making the connection now, is that I was looking at it purely on the price of something, not weighing up what the actual true value
Yes.
was. So it's quite bizarre, the fact that, okay, so the voucher's £200, and there could have been a hotel that kind of fit the bill, but actually when I look at it on a deeper level, it might have not provided the value, because I was just looking at the value as being tied up in the number only, pretty much. So actually I'm trying to be smart by maximizing a number. That's what I feel like I'm doing.
So for you, and it's different for everybody, this is why it's so good to investigate. So what I think we're noticing is there's been a diversion, almost like a magician's trick. I think I'm after value for money, and it's a phrase everybody's using the whole time, and we use it in business, and I want to give value for money. And anytime we have one of these phrases, there's probably something going on below the surface that I'm not seeing. And that's true for anyone. It won't be the same for everyone as it is for you. But anyone listening to this could stop and say, what am I really looking for when I'm talking about value for money? What's going on? And for you, there's definitely something about making wise decisions and not being a fool. And that can pull you, as our unconscious emotion does, that can pull you into behaviors that aren't really where you want to be. So now let's flip it. And we talked about this in the episode where you already had a lovely, was it New Year? You went away with your wife.
Yeah.
So people could listen back to that. I don't know what episode it was, but let's just reconnect on this occasion. Okay, so if I'm not being pulled into a slightly tight, constrained, not wanting to be a fool thing, thinking that's value for money, but it's not, it's something else. And if I realize the money, the price isn't the value, back to Oscar Wilde, if I want to not focus on the price of everything, I want to focus on the value. And we remember value is what is strong, healthy, moral, generally good. What is it that you really want to maximize when you're going away with your wife? Because that's the value. That's actually the
Yeah.
value. And you're using money to get it. That's the value.
And that's really, really simple. It was an enjoyable experience with my wife to spend time with her away. Also to show that she's valued by me arranging a trip and taking time away together, because I know that she'll really enjoy it and she would really value that experience. So that's what I'm looking for. And throw in connection as well.
So some of the things that I value with and without money. So I, Shabba, value connection, time, really showing my wife that she's valued.
Yeah.
And I know that she feels valued when she knows I put time and care into things, having good experiences. Now we're talking about values and value, right? And do you notice it already feels different?
Feels lighter.
Do you notice in your body there's a change? So that's one thing people listening can notice for. And before we even get to the price or this deal or that, notice how am I in my body, in my breathing, in my physiology when I'm chasing value for money, whether it's for my holiday or a business deal or a client relationship. How am I in that moment? Often I might feel quite tight or tense or not very creative or not very relaxed. How am I when I'm connected or reminding myself of what are the things I really value, whatever they are? For you, connection, time, good experience, showing my wife she's cared for and appreciated. It feels different in my body in the moment.
Yeah.
That is a clue to what's truly valuable in life. And we get there because we've separated, thank you to Oscar Wilde and Peter Koenig and a few others, we've separated the number, the price, from the value. Then we can start to have a very different conversation about price, value, and value for money. But until we see that price is often diverting or pulling our energy somewhere different, and until we connect with what's actually valuable, we probably get stuck.
Okay. I think that was really valuable.
Well, I'm glad.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
my invoice.
Separating those two. For me, I felt an immediate shift from like being in my head to
Yeah.
just in my heart, just feeling, when I spoke about those things that were important, honoring my wife, showing that she's appreciated, just felt really nice inside. Whereas previously I was like, value from, I was up in my head a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. It's a really good sign to look for.
Yeah, so and I find that with a lot of this work is that and we've discussed it before, that your body gives you great feedback as to what's going on. So we've made that separation. So where do we go next once we've made that sort of separation?
Okay. Well, good question. The separation is important, and noticing the body, as you say, and noticing what's really going on. A couple of possibilities. One is in the direction of what I said before, starting to know our money values. So, because maybe we don't all have endless amounts of money, and maybe many of us don't have very much discretionary money at all. So, it would be a mistake to think I can only move more in terms of what's valuable if I have lots of money. That's part of the problem. So, let's say I decide connection is important and my wife knowing she's valued is important and having an enjoyable experience is important, but I don't have any money or any vouchers. If I believe I can only have those things because of the price or the money, I then think I'm disconnected from those experiences because I have no money. That's how a lot of the modern consumer society works. But actually, real connection and real special moments with my wife or whoever or any of these values are possible with and without money. So
Yeah.
maybe I put some time in, or maybe, I don't know, I clean the house and pick some flowers from the garden and put some nice music on and arrange for the kids to go out with friends. That's amazing. Did it require money? Not really. So again, when I connect price and value all the time and value for
Mm,
money, I can miss the opportunities to bring what's really valuable into my life that may not require money. Now, again, I'm not saying it's the same as a 2 week holiday in Bahamas, but actually, you can have really shitty 2 week holidays in Bahamas. You can not enjoy them. You can be stressed out on holiday. The money doesn't necessarily give you the value or the experience.
and that's so important. And I did learn that on the trip because the weather wasn't actually great. It was pretty windy. It was dull, and it wasn't conducive for a nice boat ride down the Thames.
Right.
And I had a cold, and so I wasn't even feeling that great. And so it highlighted, and it was almost like a lesson that you can think all you want about, maximizing the value of the voucher and this, and you're going to get such and such from spending your money, but the experience is just not linked to the money and what you spend, even if you're well intentioned, because you could just be feeling ill that day.
Could do. I mean, you could also have a lovely connected time when I'm feeling ill, but it's
Yeah,
very different from what I imagine. And it's
exactly.
different from what the TV adverts say. And it's different from what the holiday brochures
Yeah, the
say.
sandals brochure or the sandals TV ad.
Yeah, well, but we have to be careful because we are sold under this phrase value for money, and the whole way most of the world conflates what is valuable and strong and moral and healthy with a price. It's very easy for all of us to think the more I spend, the more of what I really want I will get. And marketeers know this, and people who put prices know this. And I'm not saying there's no relation. Of course, you get a nicer hotel room. We've talked about this
Yeah.
before. But the problem is we miss the opportunity. So that's one place we can go. Now, there's a couple of others. One is there's a really nice model about different types of value in society that can help explain why we get confused. That might be useful. The other is to flip it, because so far we've talked about how when I'm the buyer, get value for money. But often people who work for themselves or have to set their own rates or have to go on the job market are also very concerned with giving value for money. So which of those is interesting for today? We can always do the other one another time.
I think let's go with the first.
Okay. All right. And then maybe we'll have another conversation on giving value for
Giving,
money.
giving value. Yeah, let's explore the different
Okay, right.
types.
So this model comes from Peter Koenig, who was the creator of the money work that we're exploring a lot of the time. So if people think about three different levels of value, what Peter's trying to explain, by the way, is how money flows in society. So if you like, money flows to these three different levels of value. And particularly, he's trying to explain why, when you really do what you love in life or follow your heart, you won't necessarily get lots of money. You might, but you won't necessarily. because there's a lot of strange new age ideas out there that say if you do what you love, all the money will flow. You'll get all the money you want. And I'm not sure how much we've talked about that on the podcast. We definitely need to. It's not as simple as that. What we're saying in this work is if you do what you love, you get to do what you love, which is great, which you should do because you'll feel happy and healthy and strong and vital, and the world will come and support you. It doesn't necessarily mean that money will flow, but you'll be okay either way. So that's a whole other conversation. Yeah. The first level of value is what Peter calls addictive value. And what he's saying is these are things that have no real long-term or intrinsic value other than if you have an addiction to them, then you will put money towards satisfying your craving. So you might think cigarettes. There's no nutritional value. They don't help you in any way. In fact, we know they're not good. But if I'm addicted to cigarettes, I will put money in that direction to get my cigarettes. Make sense? Addictive value.
Okay.
Drugs, arguably some foods that are very low in nutritional value.
Yeah, I was going to think ultra high processed foods would probably...
Ultra high processed food. Probably all sorts of things on the internet, things that give you a quick dopamine hit, many things. And by the way, I'm not making a moral argument. I'm just offering a categorization of where money flows. Okay. So all of those things, it's like, well, when you don't have the buzz or the craving, they're not really valuable. But when you do, you'll put money in to satisfy the craving.
I was going to just ask about sort of compulsive shopping. So buying stuff that you don't need. I immediately sort of went there, but I didn't want to say something because I was like, maybe that falls into the second bracket.
Well, I think that's a good example of how these categories can blur. So let me say the next one, because most shopping, if it's not addictive, is this second one, which he calls value in use.
Okay.
Let me say value in use. So value in use, I would say, is most things we buy. They do have a use beyond the addiction, and I'll put money. So my car is useful. It's not like I'm addicted to my car. It's useful. It helps me move about. I'll put money towards it. But when the car's worn out, the value's gone. My laptop, technology, furniture, clothing, pens, many things. It's not that I'm addicted. You can clearly say, well, they have some use beyond just an addictive buzz, and money will flow towards these things. And then if they're no longer useful or if they wear out, I'll have to replace them or the money won't flow to them.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm looking at novelty as part of the value is not just in the longevity of the use of the product, but the novelty that it provides you, which is where it gets a little bit blurred, right? So the car could still be useful.
Yeah.
However, the novelty wears out, and therefore you feel the need to replace it because you're obviously tying something up in the car, right?
Yeah. So it can get blurry.
Yeah.
And what you make the point, and again, advertisers and marketeers know this, in order to sell more of a value in use commodity, if you can attach it to a slightly addictive quality, you might get people to replace things before they need to or always think they're new. So the smell of a new car is not really part of the car. You don't really need a car to smell a certain way, but there is a new car smell. Yeah. Or the smell of when you open a new iPhone. It's not really important for the use of the phone, but marketers know that if you can make it desirable in that certain way, you put more money. So arguably, and as you said, compulsive shopping, I buy things I don't really need because I've already got 60 pairs of shoes. I don't have a use for another one. That could be quite addictive. Or my phone really works perfectly well, thank you very much. In fact, like most of us, I'm only using 10% of what my phone can actually do, but something compels me to have the new phone. Yeah. So I think those examples are a blurring between in use and addictive. How are we doing so far?
Yeah, I like it. I'm building up a sort of framework as we go along.
I find it helpful in various ways. So what we're saying is in general, as a society, The current consciousness of most people in society and how business works and all of our ideas about growth and economic growth pulls a lot of money into those forms of value. If you can make something addictive or at least useful for a time, most of the economic money will go in that direction. And some people say, well, of course it should. That is what an economy does. The third form of value Peter calls aesthetic value. Aesthetic value is harder to pin down, it's harder to quantify, and here's the thing, it never gets used up, right? So what would be an example? Connection. I want to feel connected. I want to feel in good relationship. I want my wife to feel cared for. Now, all right, sometimes I might get crabby and
Yeah.
but in general, you don't have a limit to how connected or loved or inspired or healthy or wise or good you feel or other people. This is not addictive. This is in terms of neurotransmitters, I think this is more serotonin than dopamine,
Mm.
right? The feeling of well-being. Now, many things that help us access that value are things like spending time in nature, spending time in the garden, fresh air, being with our loved ones. It could be many, many things, looking after our bodies, reading, studying, listening to beautiful music. And they'll be different for different people. Taking the time to prepare really lovely food, doesn't have to be expensive, but cooking rather than grabbing the
Mm.
ultra processed meal. There are many, many forms of what Peter calls aesthetic value in the world. Now, I think in terms of value for money and your story, often what's happening is we live in a very consumer culture where most people and most money still flows to, excuse me, in use and addictive. But what we're yearning for is often an aesthetic value. But the economic rules and the institutional policies of governments haven't found a way of saying, this is what's really important. So we are going to spend vast amounts of monies regrowing our forests. And we are going to move to a 4-day week so people can have more time to connect. And we are going to invest massively in our communities. We haven't yet found a way of doing it. They often get marginalized. But as individuals, we can still make choices to try and focus our time and energy and our money, if we have it, into aesthetic value. So there's a lot baked into that, but let me stop and see where this takes you and if it's helpful with our value for money discussion.
Yeah, I was just immediately thinking as you were saying that the third type of value, the aesthetic value, immediately sort of just strikes me as, yeah, that's not the reason why money doesn't go, because they're not profitable, commercially sort of viable in the traditional sense. But actually, we don't even know what the productivity benefits or the commercial benefits could be by investing in those and actually appreciating those kinds of values even more. But it just doesn't fit the current narrative, which is really interesting. But if I now look at my sort of framework of, I'm definitely mixing up those values, or that particular model. You know, the voucher one is a classic example of what I'm really after, which is the aesthetic values, and I'm sort of tying it up in a hotel and in a, getting, dinner and breakfast and all of these things, which is where I guess the internal conflict then sort of starts to
That's
play
right.
out.
That's right. And of course, it's an internal conflict, but it is a conflict in our society. It's
Yeah.
not just you. So, of course, we can look in personally, but our whole society has not found ways. This is why we're burning up the Amazon rainforest. Because in the current consciousness of money and the current way most money flows, you can make money by finding the use of the forest. You know, we can use this land to graze cattle, or we can chop down these trees to sell wood. That's value in use. But being the lungs of the planet, or just the intrinsic goodness of knowing there's this incredible diverse ecosystem, even though in our hearts and souls and bodies we know it's good, we haven't yet found collectively a way to channel our energy and money into keeping it going. And there's examples of this all over the world. And in fact, different branches of economics are trying to understand this. So one branch of economics is called environmental economics. And what that's trying to do is preserve all of these wonderful ecosystems by putting a price on them. It's an attempt. So how much would it cost if we didn't have fresh air? How much would it cost us to produce fresh air? It's
Yeah.
unfathomable. If we didn't have healthy ecosystems and fresh water, how much would it cost us to try and create it? It's an attempt to put a value on the things that we don't easily put a
Mm.
money value on. Ecological economics works slightly differently and says, what are you, crazy? Obviously, we need fresh air. Obviously, we need water. And we might add, obviously, we need connection and belonging and health and to feel good in our communities and meaningful lives. You don't even need to put a number on it. It's obviously good. We need to create an economics that puts what's really important at the center. That's a whole argument. My point is this: as a culture, we're struggling to find a way to really, really act as if we value what is the most valuable. But as individuals, every time we do that, we make it a little bit more possible for society. So every time I remember, oh, I don't have to have a fancy hotel. I can express connection, belonging, respect. I can have fun in this way. I can find a way to create aesthetic value, whether I have money or not. Every time we do it, we're pulling the whole system just a tiny bit into knowing how to do that. It's quite a big idea I've introduced. What do you think?
It is too many things sort of spinning around in terms of the economic impact. Obviously, just in that example, like hospitality and tourism and all of these things, which are very much linked with the aesthetic value that we were talking about because of the experiences, etc. So it's like, are we just trying to be more conscious about the decisions that we make, as opposed to, we're not saying that obviously spending money on going to hotels is a bad thing. We're not saying that. I'm just trying to bring this all together in terms
Mhm.
of a
Well,
what.
I think if we bring it together, and I'm aware of
Yeah,
time, so maybe we close off and see if there's something we can leave people
yeah,
with, think about. I did say none of this is a moral
right,
judgment. It's a categorization. So the first thing people could do is remember the three things: addictive value, value and use, aesthetic. We could just think for ourselves, if I drew a diagram of my money flow, where is it going? And how do I
right.
feel about that? Is it working for me? That would be a great thing to do. I think what I'm suggesting, not as a moral judgment, but just as an experience, is often we the things we're really looking for are more likely to be connected with the aesthetic value. And sometimes we make a mistake of thinking I'll get them through buying stuff or through my addictions. Social media is a great example. I'm not against social media. I'm not making a moral judgment, but there does seem to be research that we go on social media to feel connected, but end up feeling more lonely. So that
Mm,
would be an example where the value I'm looking for is connection, but maybe I'm looking in the wrong place. So if people were just to draw those three and actually draw their flows, that would be a great step, really.
yeah,
And then to bring it back to your story, if I remember when I get my £200 voucher and my free money, what do I really want? And if what I really want is more aesthetic value, then I might simply remember, oh, there may be many ways of getting the value that I really want at this point, and I can use my voucher, I can use my money to get it, but I don't have to assume that I have to spend £199 to get it. Who knows? Maybe there's another way of doing it. So
yeah.
just to remind ourselves of the value that we're looking for and the values that we hold as humans, and then we use our money to try and bring those things about consciously.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. And also, in my particular situation, it's the stress and time that ended up going into that sort of search or quest for value was it was almost like a wild goose chase, because what you're looking for is not being found in that particular transaction at all. In my case,
Yeah. So in that sense, it's almost like you've put a zero, you've put a negative in the aesthetic value, because what I want is
yeah,
to feel good and have connection, but I'm actually depleting my account because I'm feeling more stressed. It's the same as what humanity is doing more widely to the planet. Because we think we can satisfy the things we really want through buying more stuff and manufacturing more stuff and extracting, we're actually destroying the aesthetic value. We're destroying nature. So you're
mm,
right, as well as trying to maximize the forms of value that I want, can I notice if the way I'm going about my life is putting negatives in different accounts? That's important too. Big topic this week, Shabba.
they're all big, but I think that's a great place to wrap up. And I'm very interested still to look at the providers of value
Yes.
and so I think we need to pencil that in for
We
another
do provide value, and I haven't forgotten scarcity and abundance either. So
scarcity and
thanks
abundance.
for coming. And anyone listening, if you've got questions, reflections, comments on the model, we'd love to hear them so we can start responding to those too.
Cheers, Tim. I'll see you next
Yeah.
time.
See you next week. Bye.